Welcome to Liverpool, where in 15 minutes Keir Starmer will deliver his second in-person conference speech as party leader, and the first, of course, with Liz Truss as Prime Minister. How will he pivot the party and his leadership to face the new political and economic realities? Joining me this afternoon, Times radio presenter, columnist and former Labour advisor Ayesha Hazarika, The Spectator's deputy political editor Katy Balls, Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy and our political editor Chris Mason. This is the scene inside the conference hall at the moment as delegates gather and wait to hear from the Labour leader in about quarter of an hour. Keir Starmer arrived at the conference centre to huge applause a little while ago with his wife Victoria. He will echo the words of Tony Blair, saying the Labour Party is the political wing of the British people. He'll accuse the Tories of losing control of the British economy and say Labour is now the party of sound money. So, welcome to our second programme, taking in Keir Starmer's speech, his second in-person speech even since he became leader. Let's turn to you first of all, David. What do you want to hear from Keir Starmer today? What's he got to say?
I think we need a vision that is an alternative to what we've seen from Liz Truss in the last few days. Clearly, it's an economic vision about how we are productive, how we get growth, how we get skills, centred on a green economic plan that was set out by Ed Miliband and built on by Rachel Reeves on Monday. It's a very exciting prospect. And
so you really do want to hear more than just a critique, as we have heard legitimately from Labour Party politicians about the Conservative government. There's got to be something more proactive from you.
I'm very confident, Joe, that the British public will look at this speech and they will be left with an alternative. They will be very clear what a Labour government would mean for them and their families if they put their trust in us at the next general election.
Chris, how have you found it over the last couple of days? I mean, for me, there's a change, a definite change. There's a mood of confidence for the first time in many, many years. How do you think they're going to be able to turn that into any sort of electoral reality?
I think there is a mood of confidence, and if you like to define a positive by the absence of a negative from the party's perspective, there isn't that prospect, as was put to me by a senior figure the other night, of a fight breaking out in the corner at any moment, which in Labour conferences of the last 5 or 6 years, that absolutely has been. There hasn't been. There seems to be a bit more of a sort of unity of purpose and a focus on an election that might not be all that many months or years away. So there's that. And then I think a confidence, particularly born of what we've seen in the last few days, but I think it was there anyway, to tilt towards talking explicitly about the economy. And let's be frank, in the past, the economy as an issue has been something of an Achilles heel for Labour. If you look at opinion polls and how plenty of people would perceive Labour economically, they're absolutely leaning into that because they feel confident of their own mission, as I think we'll hear Sir Keir Starmer talk about it, and of course, what's happening in the markets and with the government.
We've heard about economic competence. Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, has talked ahead of Sir Keir Starmer, saying that you can trust us with the economy. But what would a Labour government do, David, in the first 100 days or so? What would be the one big idea that would be transformative for people's lives?
Look, by the time we get a Labour government, they won't have fixed the NHS. I think the public will be clamouring to see a reduction in those queues, particularly on cancer waits, and to see a GP in 2 weeks is not going to be sufficient. You'd expect to hear that from a Labour government, and an example of what we would do.
Do you think it's changed, Ayesha, in terms of the atmosphere here, the fights in every corner that might have broken out at conferences in the past? Do you think ideology has been shunned to some extent while the party focuses on winning?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the atmosphere here is like one I don't think I've ever experienced at a Labour. I've been coming to Labour conferences since like 2005, and there's always been trouble at Labour. It's like a sort of Christmas edition of EastEnders. There's always a lot of drama, there's a lot of beef, there's a lot of drama, and it hasn't felt like that way. Well, in fact, to the extent where a very senior member of Keir Starmer's team actually said to me, it's really strange. I was expecting drama. There isn't drama. I sort of don't know what to do with myself. But look, having said that, I think that the danger for the party is to not slip into complacency, because the polls are looking good. There is a feeling of purpose. Business is back at this conference. But I think what I'm going to be looking for, and many other people, it's not just to define the party against the Conservatives, is what does Labour stand for?
Katie?
Yeah, completely. I think you have a situation where clearly the fallout from the not-so-mini budget has been a gift to Labour at this conference, and you can see that. Rachel Reeves has been working very hard to try and get this idea of fiscal competence and faith in Labour back, and now they just need to point to some of the, the market's reaction to what the Tories are proposing, and it helps make that case. But they need to be careful that this isn't all about why you shouldn't vote Conservative, because you never know what's going to happen in the next year or so, and they need to have their own message. And I think that's one of the things that we need to see today.
All right, Chris, I think we have to let you go. You've obviously got to go into the hall, but maybe we'll speak to you later. I know, David, you're also in a rush. Everybody wants to leave me so early on. They've said there's no trouble, hasn't been any trouble at this conference, but can I read to you comments by your colleague Rupert Hook, Labour MP, because Jake Berry, the chairman of the Conservative Party, has written to Keir Starmer over her comments that were recorded at a Fringe event. She was talking about the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, and she said, if you hear him on the Today programme, you wouldn't know he is black. She then referred to him as being superficially black. He went to Eton. What action do you think Keir Starmer should take about those comments, and what's your reaction?
Oh, well, I think those comments are unfortunate. And
Only unfortunate?
No, well, they're unfortunate. I wouldn't have made them myself. And clearly, I hope Rupert apologises and retracts them, frankly.
Apparently she's standing by her comments. Jake Berry has called for the whip, the Labour whip, to be taken away. Would you support that?
Well, look, I've only just heard this story, to be honest. I don't know the full circumstances, so I don't want to sort of shoot from the hip. But what you've said, as I said, I hope she's able to stand those comments down.
Thank you for joining us briefly. Let me just show you the tweet, actually, from Jake Berry to you, Katie and Ayesha. We say goodbye to David Lammy. Keir Starmer must act over Rupert Hook's disgusting comments at the Labour Party conference about the Chancellor. Again, superficially, he is a black man because he's Conservative is a vile thing to say. Ayesha.
It's a really unpleasant, stupid thing to have said by Rupert Hook. And if you do look at senior positions of leadership, the Conservative Party has done better than the Labour Party on this. Now, I think many black and Asian people don't feel gratified for the fact that there are more ethnic minority people and more women in the cabinet, because they don't feel life is getting better for them. You know, we had a report out saying that institutional racism wasn't a thing. We've had the Windrush scandal. We've got the Rwanda policy. But I do think Rupert's comments are really, really unpleasant. I do hope she does apologise. Look, you can absolutely criticise somebody's policies and what they stand for. But if Labour thinks that that's the way to go to sort of attack somebody because of the colour of the skin, then I'm afraid I think a lot of people will be pretty disappointed with that.
Do you think Keir Starmer will be under pressure to take some sort of action?
I don't know what the action will be, but I think he will feel probably the same way as I do, and probably the same way that many of your viewers do. I think the Labour Party, instead of just sort of slagging off minority figures in the Tory party that have actually managed to sort of climb up the ladder, I think Labour should actually focus on improving some of the diversity within its own ranks.
Well, and as you say, the diversity is very clear at the top of government, with Kwasi Kwarteng as Chancellor, Suella Braverman as Home Secretary, and James Cleverly as the Foreign Secretary. How will these sorts of comments made by the Labour MP about Kwasi Kwarteng and his race go down?
I think it'll go down badly, clearly. I also think that you have a situation where we've all just been discussing how this Labour conference was a lot more professional than some of the past few, and you haven't had these internal factions, all these, if you think back to comments, at previous fringes which distract from the whole message. And I think this is probably the first test of the conference in that sense, which is, does Keir Starmer take firm action to try and distance himself? Because I think up until this point, everyone's been saying it's been going very, better than expected, God save the king, went without a hitch, and so forth. And I think this is the first point where we're saying this is actually distracting in a way from what he's trying to do.
I do think we have to put this in perspective, okay? This is one very stupid set of comments from somebody. And by the way, there are plenty of things to criticise Kwasi Kwarteng about right now as the markets tank and the pound plunges and people are worried about their mortgages. But don't attack him on the colour of his skin. It's like a no-brainer.
Well, let's go inside the hall because everybody is gathered there. There's Rachel Reeves, Angela Rayner. Oh, that was quick. David Lammy, he was sitting next to me just a few moments ago, and Yvette Cooper. Everybody waiting for Sir Keir Starmer. I think a video is going to be rolling just before he takes to his feet for that speech. It was a long speech last time. Someone reminded me 89 minutes. We'll see how long it is this time. I was speaking to your colleague in Labour, Barry Gardner, Ayesha, on this programme last week. He was, of course, in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet. He said people have had enough of Keir, the cautious capitalist, and they want to see more of Starmer, the sensible socialist. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't agree with that. I think, most people don't really care about whether somebody is a socialist or not. What they do want is somebody to get a grip on this country. They want the Labour Party to provide a really credible and energetic alternative to what is, quite frankly, a bin fire. I mean, people are, wherever you sit on the political spectrum right now, the country feels like it's in a really, really frightening place. And what I think is really interesting at this conference is even people I've spoken to who were really profoundly against Keir Starmer, very, very pro-Jeremy Corbyn people who have really stirred up trouble in past conferences at a very senior level of the party organisation, have said to me, you know what, it is different now because this is the first time since 2010 that we have really felt that we have like a shot at power. So even people on the left are actually saying, right, you know what, I'm going to pick my battles, let's actually get behind. And look, people.
Well, that's interesting if there is a unified feel, isn't there, particularly from that wing of the party.
What someone said to me is, look, it feels like we've got to the place where we can have our disagreements, but we don't need to absolutely tear each other apart publicly.
So the sort of fight for the soul of the party, well, it certainly isn't happening or hasn't happened over the last few days. You say it's been a gift to the Labour Party in terms of the fallout from Friday's fiscal event, mini-budget, not, as you coined it. I mean, I can imagine Keir Starmer having to rewrite whole sections of his speech that he was planning to give to the conference today.
Yes, and even if you look at some of those announcements, so the 45p rate, the fact that Labour said that they would undo what the Tory government planned to do and they would put their money towards nurses, you can see that this is a very reactive conference. And I think in many ways it makes sense that it's reactive because it's such a, these things are affecting people all across the country. You're very worried. But then how does he also find a space within that to make it not just about what the Tories are doing?
Yes, I mean, in terms of that policy, already announced by Rachel Reeves that he's going to spend, is going to spend that money on nurses, for example. But there are going to be questions about the economy, on the levels of borrowing, on whether there will be cuts to public services, difficult choices for a future Labour government, were they to win.
Look, definitely, and I think Keir Starmer's team, and particularly Rachel Reeves' team, are very cognizant of the fact that if they do win power, they will inherit a very, very difficult set of circumstances. So I think they're very mindful to set out a message which is saying, look, we will have a challenging time on the economy, but we will spend every pound of taxpayers' money very, very carefully. I mean, I spoke to somebody in Keir Starmer's team this morning and they said, look, the territory that they absolutely want to get on, where they feel really confident on, is on the economy. Now, that's something which has historically been a real Achilles heel for the Labour Party for such a long time. But they do feel this is quite a unique moment in time, particularly aided and abetted by this sort of fiscal dramatic event that happened last week. So that is the territory that they want to be on. They're wanting to have that fight on the economy.
And it will be about policies, but there have, as we know, been questions about Keir Starmer's passion or fight, to quote Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester. Does he need to show a little bit more passion and fight at this speech today? Katie?
I think you get different opinions on this in the sense that some people say, oh, he's boring, he's drab. But then actually, I think one of the things we're going to hear from Keir Starmer is the view inside Labour circles that there's been so much turmoil and turbulence over the past few years. Actually, a period of calm or not having to, think about all the changes of government, and actually perhaps having a boring leader could be what people want. But then you also speak to shadow cabinet members, and yes, they're very behind Keir Starmer. It's hard not to be when you look at the poll lead. But they also say, well, is he bold enough? Should we actually be capitalising on this and going a bit further? And is he a bit indecisive? And therefore, I think that when it comes to that poll lead, there's almost two ways you can go. You can carry the Ming vase and try and just keep everything as it is, or you can actually say this is a reason for us to, be bolder of vision. And I think there is a bit of a difference of opinion depending who you speak to.
I mean, I think there is a sort of argument that, look, is there enough pizzazz around Sir Keir Starmer? Some people say, look, we've had enough pizzazz over the last couple of years, and huge charisma has led us into like a very chaotic world. But someone I was speaking to last night from the Shadow Cabinet said that what's really interesting is that through all this sort of turmoil, Keir has been quite calm. And the fact that he's done a lot of jobs outside politics where he's run big organisations, and he is quite a level-headed person, when a lot of people in politics are quite hot-headed and quite live for the drama and are quite last-minute people, they're actually saying that we are going to be having let's be a lot of turmoil in British politics, in the economy, probably for the foreseeable future. So actually, a sort of sense of calmness, a sense of planning, a sense of not being flappable and thinking ahead is actually maybe something that they could sell to the public.
Well, the Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner, I spoke to her about a month or so ago on Newscast, and we were talking about Keir Starmer's delivery and his style, and she said, when I'm with Keir and there's not a camera in his face, he's such a funny character and such a nice guy. If people saw the guy that I see every day, they just absolutely love him as well. But his conditioning when he was a lawyer, sometimes he takes the emotion out of it, and I think he could put some more welly in it. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think that you could definitely argue that Keir Starmer could be more passionate. I think that's one of the problems too, in the sense that you often hear Keir Starmer talking about his vision, but lots of shadow cabinet are just not sure exactly what he thinks on some of these issues. And there are some in his shadow cabinet who also just are not sure how political he is. They think that he is...
Well, and that's because, as you said, he's had other jobs,
Yeah.
And so isn't, in that sense, tribally political in the way that others are.
Yeah, and I think, look, there's pros and cons with that, right? Like, one of the criticisms has been like, what is this guy's political mission? But then on the other hand, he's obviously from a pretty political background. The guy's called Keir, right? Like, he's from, he was very radical in his younger life. And I think he's maybe sort of growing into the freedom of not being part of something where he's politically constrained. But what I do think is that, I think he probably will show a bit more sort of passionate, but what I do think they do need to do is tell the story more, because there's actually quite a lot of policy. People think, oh, there's no policy. There's actually a lot of policy. I think they do need to tell the story more, and simple things like the slogan, for example. Many people have said the slogan here, which is fairer, greener future. It sounds like an eco-laundry tablet, and, perhaps something which is a bit more emotional, like, a fresh start for Britain or something about... So I think they could do a little bit more around that. But just one other thing, having worked for many leaders, when you're a leader, the pressure on you makes you very inhibited. Everybody looks at Ed Miliband now and goes, gosh, he seems to have this great personality and be really funny. William Hague's, like, why couldn't he have done that? Yes. Don't forget the pressure and the constraints and the scrutiny which makes you self-edit when you're in that position. It does make you more kind of cautious. So I think that's definitely a work in progress.
Well, let's just go back into the hall, because there's a pretty rousing, passionate introductory speech going on ahead of Sir Keir Starmer taking to the stage himself. Oh, they're on their feet. Conference is on their feet, clapping away, rehearsing, no doubt, for when the Labour leader comes on stage and delivers his speech to conference. There they are. As I say, the mood is buoyant. There's no doubt about it. They're onto the video, which is about a minute or so long, so we're very close. Let me just warn viewers to going out of the conference hall here and inside to hear Sir Keir Starmer deliver that speech. Just briefly, Ayesha, on Brexit, Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, spoke about Brexit making it work better in terms of helping the economy. She didn't say exactly what that would mean. Was there any sense of pushing a closer relationship with Europe from Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer?
Look, my sense is that they're treading a very careful line on Brexit. They don't want to sort of reignite and relitigate the whole row. But I think there's definitely a feeling that if Labour did get into power, they would absolutely seek to have a better and closer relationship with the EU.
We just saw a fairer, greener future there, the slogan that Ayesha was just talking about. I think we can go back inside the conference hall. Everybody is on their feet, clapping, and Keir Starmer is just appearing there on the stage. They are welcoming him for that second in-person speech that he is going to make to the delegates. Sir Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Conference. Thank you, Conference. Thank you, Satvir. Thanks for everything you're doing for our party. And thank you, Conference. It's great to be here in Liverpool. After all the changes we've made, all the hard work that we've put in, finally, we're seeing the results. Yes, Conference, we can say it at last. Arsenal are top of the league. But before I begin, I want to address something important. This is our first conference in Liverpool since 2018. That means it's our first conference since this city's call for justice for the 96 became justice for the 97. For too long, this city has been let down. So when Labour wins the next election, one of my first acts as Prime Minister will be to put the Hillsborough Law on the statute book. I know how much this matters. I've spent a lifetime helping those who've been failed by the system. I worked with Stephen Lawrence's family and Jane Clough's to get them justice. I promise you, we will get this city the justice it deserves. Conference, we've seen two sides of Britain in the last few weeks. On one side, a nation united by a profound purpose to pay its respects to a remarkable sovereign. And that queue, 5 miles at its peak, even in death, our Queen found a unique way to capture the British spirit. But Conference, the other side of Britain never went away. A Britain all at sea, where a cloud of anxiety hangs over working people. At moments of uncertainty like this, we must provide clear leadership. We must stand with working people, meet their ambitions for real change, walk towards a better future, and build a new Britain together. A Britain that is fairer, greener, more dynamic, and that isn't afraid to use the power of government to help working people succeed. Because we can't go on like this. What we've seen in the past few days has no precedent. The government has lost control of the British economy. And for what? They've crashed the pound. And for what? Higher interest rates, higher inflation, higher borrowing. And for what? Not for you, not for working people, for tax cuts for the richest 1% in our society. Don't forget, don't forgive. The only way to stop this is with a Labour government. And our problems don't end there. Raw sewage in our rivers and seas, backlogs everywhere, at our borders, in our courts, in our hospitals. Crimes like burglary, totally unpunished. People told to drive themselves to hospital after a heart attack. And millions of families, pensioners, the poorest in our society, still facing the coldest winter of their lives. I said on Sunday that a fitting tribute to the late Queen would be to turn our collar up and face the storm. And we will. Because Britain never won its battles with wishful thinking. Our success comes, first and foremost, from the hard work, the graft, and the common sense of the British people. A common sense that teachers up and down the country drum into their pupils. Fail to prepare, and you prepare to fail. Conference, that's how the Tories have governed our country for 12 long years. That's why our economy has been more brittle than others in the face of crisis. They used to lecture us about fixing the roof when the sun was shining. But take a look around Britain. They haven't just failed to fix the roof. They've ripped out the foundations, smashed through the windows, and now they've blown the doors off for good measure. Conference. My government will be different. We will run towards the challenges of tomorrow. We will get us out of this endless cycle of crisis. And we will do it with a fresh start, a new set of priorities, and a new way of governing. But it won't be easy. And the first step must be to tackle the cost of living crisis. Now, the Prime Minister has finally accepted there's no alternative to Labour's plan to freeze energy prices. When she was arguing against handouts, Labour provided the clarity our nation needed. We said this winter, not a penny more on anyone's bills. But politics about choices. And the choice, the political choice, is who pays. Working people or the oil and gas companies making huge profits from higher prices. The head of BP has said that this crisis is a cash machine for his company. But that's a cash machine fed by working people. So our choice, the only choice, the Labour choice, is to put those profits to work. This party is always on the side of working people in times of crisis. And Conference, I know this will shock you, but the Tories aren't on the side of the NHS either. My mum worked in the NHS. My sister worked in the NHS. My wife still works in the NHS. The NHS runs through our family like a stick of rock. But I tell you what, I'm really worried about how many lives are at risk this winter. Talking to doctors in my local hospital, I said, the NHS is on its knees, isn't it? And they said, no, Keir, it's face down on the floor. And the pathetic response of the government last week left it there. The way to get it back to its feet is with a stronger NHS workforce. That is the main barrier to capacity right now, staff. So as Rachel announced yesterday, we will take on an extra 7,500 medical students every year. We will double the number of district nurses. 5,000 new health visitors, 10,000 extra nursing placements. And I'll ask you questions. Conference. I'll tell you this, If it's a choice between a tax cut for those earning hundreds of thousands of pounds or supporting our NHS, that's not a hard choice for us. Labour will always deliver for our NHS. But these are just the first steps on a much bigger journey. The next Labour government must restore our sense of collective hope. We should never be left cowering in a braced position. It's time for Britain to stand tall again, to believe in ourselves again, to chart a new course and to get our future back. Now, some of you have heard this before. I grew up in a Pebble Dash semi. Dad was a toolmaker. Mum was a nurse. Our first car was a Ford Cortina. It was the 1970s. So I remember what rising prices feel like. I remember when our phone was cut off because we couldn't pay the bill. How hard it was to make ends meet. It wasn't easy. But there's something else I remember about being working class in the 1970s. Hope. Not a grandiose, utopian dream kind of hope. A hope that was ordinary, basic, taken for granted. Because like all families, although we had our ups and downs, my parents never doubted for 1 second that things would get better. And you know what? They were right. They worked their socks off and gave me the gift of opportunity. And that gift drives me to make sure no one anywhere in this country is held back by their circumstances. That's not just words, it's the story of my life. And I don't think these values are special. The opportunity to get on is what everyone wants for their family. It's more than a British value. It's what we tell our children. Work hard and you can achieve anything. Work hard and you will get a fair chance in Britain. My parents didn't just believe this, it comforted them. But is it still true? I don't think so. After 12 long years, our spirit is ground down. When I talk to working people now, they tell me they work harder and harder just to stand still, that their graft can't provide their family with a sense of security, that they're worried their kids won't have a better life than them. Conference, what does it say about Britain when families worry like this about their children's future? It says an unwritten contract is broken. A contract where in return for hard work you get on, where your contribution is always respected, and which reaches through the generations to say Britain will always be better for your children. That's the deep cost of Tory failure. They keep talking about aspiration, but they don't understand how they've choked it off for working people. And it gets worse, because the other thing people say is politics can't do anything about it. They don't think real change is possible anymore. And who can blame them? Just look at what they've been through. They were told we're all in this together, yet they paid for the mess made by bankers. They cried out for economic change in a referendum, but their calls went unanswered. They united to defeat a virus, only to see the government break all the rules that they respected. And now this, the biggest hit to their living standards in a century. And it turns out there is money for the top 1%. Now, I'm not going to stand here and pretend the awful conflict in Ukraine is not the immediate spark of the cost of living crisis. We will never allow Putin's threats and imperialism to succeed. We will stand alongside Ukraine's people, fighting on the front line of him. So let this entire conference say together, Slava Ukraini! The conference. I will never accept that the war is an excuse for how unprepared Britain was to tackle the fallout. The war didn't ban offshore wind. The war didn't scrap home insulation. The war didn't stall nuclear energy. The Tories did that. And in their budget last week, they sent out a new message. A message that echoes around the kitchens and workplaces of families right across the country and says, your struggles, your hopes, your ambitions don't matter to us. We are not here for you. You are not our people. We are here for those at the top, and the rest of you can shove off. And conference, make no mistake about it. In one bold move on Friday, the Tory party gave up on any claim it may have had to be a party of aspiration. So we need to get moving. That's the other thing my background gives me, impatience. If you're born without privilege, you don't have time for messing around. You don't walk around problems without fixing them. And you don't surrender to the instincts of organisations that won't face up to change. As a human rights lawyer, I took on governments who wanted to keep the barbaric practice of death by hanging. In Northern Ireland, I worked alongside others to make sure the police service worked for all communities. As Director of Public Prosecutions, I overhauled the handling of sexual violence cases to make them work better for victims. And this working class impatience is what drives me in this job too. Now, conference, I knew in April 2020, when I became leader of this party, we had a big task before us. We had to change our party and prepare for power all in one go. Not change for change's sake. Change with a purpose. To make our party fit to serve our country. That's why we had to rip out anti-Semitism by its roots. That's why we had to show our support for NATO is non-negotiable. Show we want business to prosper. Shared unworkable policy. Country first, party second. And I didn't do this alone. Conference, we did it together. And it shows. We've taken councils in Scotland, in Wales, in every part of England, from Southampton to Stevenage, Wrexham to Wolverhampton. We've shown Labour can win again anywhere. We won in Wakefield with Simon, our first by-election gain for a decade, Simon. But people need more. They're crying out for change, looking for decisive leadership. They need to know we can be a reforming government with clear answers to the big challenges they face, that we can grow the economy and raise living standards for everyone, not just a privileged few. Tackle climate change by creating new jobs, new industries, new opportunities. redesign our public services to unleash opportunity and provide security, restore faith in politics as a force for good, get Britain's hope, its confidence and its future back. So, conference, imagining that we're looking back at the first term of the next Labour government, how is Britain different? I'll tell you. We've defeated the cost of living crisis and the clouds of anxiety have lifted. Services are there when you need them. Our economy is stable again. Business has the certainty to invest. The NHS is back in good health. And people are starting to raise their sights, believe in Britain again. Britain is fairer. People feel they can get on. There's more opportunity, more affordable housing, fairer taxes, higher wages, jobs more secure. Families can aspire again, look forward with hope again. And Britain is greener. We're leading the world on climate change. People look at us and follow our example. New jobs, industries, technologies benefit all parts of the country. We're proving net zero can be achieved, and the most precious gift to the next generation is within our grasp: a safer, more prosperous world to live in. And because we're fairer, because we are greener, we're also more dynamic. Our entrepreneurial spirit unleashed, new technology improving public services, cutting-edge science and world-class services driving economic growth. And working people are respected as the people who create the wealth that drives Britain forward. And there's one more thing, something important. People have started to notice it's possible to govern with integrity. To unite rather than divide, to respect other points of view, to see that long-term plans trump short-term fixes, that decline is not inevitable. Yes, some people will say politicians are all the same, but not as many. In Grimsby a few months ago, I was really struck by a woman I met. She said something which was really simple. I don't just want to survive, I want to live. As I got back on the train, that phrase went round and round in my head. I don't just want to survive, I want to live. Conference, I want to look her in the eyes after 5 years of a Labour government, and I want to know that she and millions of people like her are not just surviving, they're thriving. That's the difference a Labour government will make. That's the Britain we're fighting for. Conference, let's be honest, missions don't achieve themselves. You need focus, determination, and the courage to make very difficult choices, particularly when managing the country's finances. Rachel Reeves and I have set out a framework for sound money. We're determined to reduce debt as a share of our economy. Every policy we announce will be fully costed. And we will set up an Office for Value for Money to make sure public spending targets the national interest. And we should be clear about what that means. It means not being able to do things, good Labour things, as quickly as we might like. That's what responsible government looks like. Because if you lose control of the economy, if you act irresponsibly, as the Tories have done in spectacular fashion, then you lose the ability to do anything. And working people pay the price. We will not let that happen. We will only borrow to invest when it's in the long-term national interest, when the cost of not investing makes it much more expensive for the next generation. Conference. The Labour Party is at its best when we glimpse the future and lead our country towards it. In 1945, out of the rubble of the Second World War, we built a land fit for heroes. In 1964, we harnessed the white heat of technology to pay our way in a modern economy. And in 1997, we modernised a country held back by crumbling public services and outdated institutions. It's time. It's time to write a new chapter of Labour Party history about how we built a fairer, greener, more dynamic Britain by tackling the climate emergency head-on and used it to create the jobs, the industries and the opportunities of the future. I come at this not just as leader of the Labour Party, but also as a father. As a father, I'm spurred on by the voices of our children, the cry of indignation, demanding our generation act before it's too late. As Labour leader, I see it as a matter of justice and opportunity, about the fairness and better society that I came into politics to create, the biggest opportunity we've had in decades to make this country work for working people. Across the world, countries are already gearing up to meet this challenge. We cannot afford to miss out, because some nation is going to lead the world in offshore wind. Why not this one? Some nation will win the race for electric vehicles. Why not us? Some nation will be the first to harness new hydrogen power. Why not Britain? Conference. That's why today I'm so proud to launch our Green Prosperity Plan, a plan that will turn the UK into a green growth superpower. And driving the plan forward is a goal that will put us ahead of any major economy in the world. 100% clean power by 2030. A huge national effort. A huge national effort. An effort that will double Britain's onshore wind capacity, treble solar power, quadruple offshore wind, invest in tidal, hydrogen, nuclear, back carbon capture, commit to green steel production, new renewable ports, new gigafactories, and insulate 19 million homes. And working with Ed Miliband and his team, we'll make sure this energy revolution powers up all parts of the country. Let's get clean hydrogen energy into South Yorkshire, into the east of England, across the river in the Wirral. Offshore wind in Scotland, Teesside, eastern North Yorkshire. Solar power growing in rural communities in the southeast, the southwest and the Midlands. This will require a different way of working, the biggest partnership between government, business and communities this country has ever seen. It will mean new jobs, more than 1 million new jobs. Training for plumbers, electricians, engineers, software designers, technicians and builders. It will all start within the first 100 days of a new Labour government. And what will it mean for working people? Cheaper bills and higher living standards. Take home insulation. I saw this for myself on Abbey Road. Not that one. This one's on a council estate in Kirklees, where the Labour Council had the good Yorkshire foresight to do a real job on insulation. I went in January, it was freezing cold. I was invited in, the house was warm, the energy bills next to nothing, and the tenants were grinning from ear to ear. And why not? Over £1,000 off your winter fuel bill. What's not to like? Clean energy is already cheaper than fossil fuels, 9 times cheaper. We just need more of it. This is about fair growth, powered by clean British energy, everywhere in the country. That's what levelling up really looks like. Practical Labour solution, not empty Tory slogans. And conference. As Rachel announced yesterday, a new British sovereign wealth fund will drive us forward on this mission. We will make sure that the public money we spend building up British industry spurs on private investment, stimulates growth in construction, life sciences, finance and insurance, and the British people enjoy the returns. We won't make the mistake the Tories made with North Sea oil and gas back in the 1980s, when they frittered away the wealth from our national resources. Just look at what's happening at the moment. The largest onshore wind farm in Wales. Who owns it? Sweden. Energy bills in Swansea are paying for schools and hospitals in Stockholm. The Chinese Communist Party has a stake in our nuclear industry. And 5 million people in Britain pay their bills to an energy company owned by France. So we will set up Great British Energy within the first year of a Labour government. A new company. A new company. Conference, a new company that takes advantage of the opportunities in clean British power. And because it is right for jobs, because it is right for growth, because it is right for energy independence from tyrants like Putin, then yes, Conference, Great British Energy will be publicly owned. Conference, none of this will be easy. It's not like flicking a switch. It will mean tough battles on issues like planning and regulation. But when the Tories naysay and carp, remember this. The road to net zero is no longer one of stern, austere self-denial. It's at the heart of modern 21st century aspiration. Technology has turned everything on its head. Green and growth don't just go together. They're inseparable. The future wealth of this country is in our air, in our seas, in our skies. Britain should harness that wealth and share it with all. British power to the British people. That's why I've always said we will fight the Tories on economic growth. Their record is appalling. The worst decade of growth in 2 centuries. Or, as the Chancellor puts it, a vicious cycle of stagnation. Now, I have to say, as a former prosecutor, it always warms my heart when somebody caught bang to rights pleads guilty at the first opportunity. And after 12 years, what's their big idea? Unlimited bonuses for bankers. Back the billionaires. Go easy on the oil and gas companies. It's a nonsense. everyone earning less than £155,000 a year loses out with their plan. And they say they don't believe in redistribution, but they do, from the poor to the rich. And then they're loading up the country with debt to pay for it. And what about those in the middle? They're losing £780. And conference, I'm sure you've all heard that tape, where Liz Truss says Britain's working people lack skill and application. That the problem with our economy is they don't graft hard enough. Working people don't graft hard enough. No, we're not going to take this. This is the fight. If they want to fight us on redistribution, if they want to fight us on workers' rights, if they want to tell us working people don't come first, we'll take them on and we will win. And we will win not just because we have fairness on our side, but because we have economic reason on our side too. Trickle-down economics doesn't work. Britain won't be better off just because we make the rich richer. The real problem is we create too many jobs that are low-paid and insecure. We lock too many communities out of the wealth we create. And public services aren't strong enough to help working people succeed. That's why we struggle to grow. Our economic foundations are weak. And the Tory argument is, that's fine. If the City of London races ahead and the rest of the country stagnates, they think that's okay. Conference, they're the ones not prepared to graft. They're the ones not prepared to do the hard yards on growth. But we will. We will end the blight of low pay and insecure work with our New Deal for working people. We will transform the state so the decisions which drive growth in communities are made by local people with skin in the game. The people of Liverpool know what's best for Liverpool. And the same is true in Burnley, Sunderland, Peterborough and Plymouth. If we want fair growth everywhere, communities need a stake. And they need good, affordable housing for working people as well. I've seen home ownership rise almost my entire life. It's the bedrock of security and aspiration. That Pebble Dash semi meant everything to my family. But now, under the Tories, the dream of owning your own home is slipping away for too many. And that's a political choice. Because if you keep inflating demand without increasing supply, house prices will only rise and homes become less affordable for working people. So we will set a new target, 70% home ownership, and we will meet it with a new set of political choices, a Labour set of political choices. No more buy-to-let landlords or second homeowners getting in first. We will back working people's aspirations. Help first-time buyers onto the ladder with a new mortgage guarantee scheme. Reform planning so speculators can't stop communities getting shovels in the ground. My message is this. If you're grafting every hour to buy your own home, Labour is on your side. Labour is the party of home ownership in Britain today. And let me say something about business too. Don't be fooled into thinking that they buy into the Tory trickle-down fantasy. Business leaders aren't knocking on my door saying they want to rip up employee rights. They don't tell me that the problems they face will be solved by corporation tax cuts. They want fair taxes, high skills, and the long-term confidence to invest. I want to be crystal clear about this. I'm not just pro-business, I want to partner with business. So we will scrap business rates, level the playing field for startups and the high street, give employers new flexibility to invest in world-class training they need. And as Johnny Reynolds said, invite them to drive forward our modern industrial strategy, a true partnership between government, businesses and trade unions. This isn't about the size of government, it's about what government can do. Government can support businesses to innovate and grow, can bring in the creative genius of our scientists and universities, can unite us to tackle the country's challenges on behalf of working people. Tory ideology is a barrier to growth. And I'll tell you another one. The mess they've made of our public services. Strong public services are the foundation of a successful economy, always. Deal with NHS waiting lists and growth improves. Invest in childcare so parents can go back to work and growth improves. More mental health support, world-class schooling, skills training when you need it, and growth improves. But we have to be honest. I would love to stand here and say Labour will fix everything. But the damage they've done to our finances and our public services means this time the rescue will be harder than ever. It will take investment. Of course it will. But it will also take reform. One, we need to recruit, train and motivate the very best doctors, nurses, teachers, police officers. Two, we need to get the best innovation in their hands, make technology work for us. Three, we need to make sure services are built around people's lives, empower them to meet the challenges of the future. And four, and above all, we must shift towards a prevention-first policy. Now, I've seen this for myself. Early intervention saves lives and saves money. Every time I read a serious case review as Director of Public Prosecutions, the story was the same, just a change of name. Another life that could have gone in a different direction if someone had stepped in earlier. It's that kind of injustice that must drive us to think differently about our public services. In health, it's about moving treatment towards communities, exploring how technology can free up NHS workers to focus on care. In education, it means not just imparting knowledge, but developing the creativity, the resilience, the curiosity young people need in a modern world. In crime, it means a model of policing that can focus on prevention and give victims faith in a system that will not let violence go unpunished. At conference, the state of our public services show you exactly who the Tories are. Shows you they fundamentally don't believe government can help working people succeed. Every time they choose a new Prime Minister, and there's been plenty of them, you get a hymn of lip service to its power, usually from the steps of Downing Street itself. But as soon as the black door swings shut behind them, they retreat to their comfort zone. That's why they don't plan for the future. They don't believe it's their job. And so we lurch from crisis to crisis, always reacting, always behind the curve, a sticking plaster, never a cure. And if you want the totemic symbol of this, the single biggest failure to grasp the nettle, then look no further than Brexit. Conference, the policy of my Labour government will always be to make Brexit work. It's no secret I voted Remain, as the Prime Minister did. But what I heard around the country was people who thought we'd got our priorities wrong, who wanted democratic control over their lives, but who also wanted opportunities for the next generation, communities they felt proud of, public services they could rely on. I didn't hear that Brexit was about slashing workers' rights. I didn't hear people wanting to lower standards on food, animal welfare and the environment. I didn't hear them wanting to end redistribution. So I want to speak directly to the people who left Labour on this issue. Whether you voted Leave or Remain, you've been let down. And with Liz Truss, the Tories are changing the meaning of Brexit before your eyes. If you voted for a government to step in on your side, for better work, higher wages, more opportunities in your community, for an NHS that is modern and reliable, if you voted to take control of your life and for the next generation to have control of theirs, then I say to you, that is what I will deliver. I will make work pay for people who create this country's wealth. I will make sure we buy, make and sell more in Britain. I will revitalise public services and control immigration using a points-based system. I will spread power and opportunity to all our communities. And I will never be shy to use the power of government to help working people succeed. Labour will make Brexit work. Labour will deliver change. And you'll never get that from the Tories. And conference, you won't get it from the SNP either. Conference. The challenges we face, the cost of living crisis, climate change, standing up to Putin, are common across our four nations. We saw off the threat of fascism and deadly disease together. We built the NHS and the welfare state together. But I don't believe in our union just because of our history. I believe in it because of our future. I know we can meet the great challenges to come, build new beacons of fairness that light up the islands we share. Scotland needs a Labour government that can deliver change. But it also needs the power and resources to shape its own future, whoever is in power in Westminster. And the SNP are not interested in this. For them, Scotland's success in the UK is met with gritted teeth, seen as a roadblock to independence, and so they stand in the way. We can't work with them. We won't work with them. No deal under any circumstances. A fairer, greener, more dynamic Scotland in a fairer, greener, more dynamic Labour Britain. Conference on climate change, growth, aspiration, levelling up, Brexit, economic responsibility. We are the party of the centre ground. Once again, the political wing of the British people. And we can achieve great things. Yesterday, we even managed to get a Liverpool crowd cheering Gavin Neville. But let's not kid ourselves. The next 2 years will be tough. The Tories want a fifth term and they will stop at nothing to achieve it. And because of their record, because of the state of Britain, they're getting desperate. With so little that's good to defend, they will lash out. We need to be prepared, disciplined, focused. Spend every day working to earn the trust of the British people. Meet their attacks with hope. Provide the leadership this country so desperately needs. Because as in 1945, 1964, 1997, this is a Labour moment. So, conference. Say it loud and believe it. Britain will deal with the cost of living crisis. Britain will get its future back. A country where aspiration is rewarded, where working people succeed, a force for good in the world, a clean energy superpower, a fairer, greener, more dynamic nation. This is my commitment to you, the national mission of the next Labour government. And together with the British people, we will do it. Thank you, Conference.
Standing ovation there for Sir Keir Starmer. He spoke for just under an hour, ending his speech by saying, as in 1945, 1964 and 1997, this is a Labour moment. He spoke with a sense of self-belief. It was a confident, self-assured speech. There he is, hugging his wife, Victoria, there at the end of that speech. It was a confident performance by him, the second in-person speech that he has given to Conference, and he spoke about aspiration. He said he didn't just want British people to survive, he wanted them to thrive under a future Labour government. He was very clear about restating how far, he says, the Labour Party has moved and that its current position has marked a sea change from what was before. He said we have to make our Labour Party fit to serve our country. That's why we had to rip out anti-Semitism by its roots. That got a huge and sustained standing ovation, and there were a number of standing ovations. Why we had to show, he said, our support for NATO, that it's non-negotiable. Show we want business to prosper, shed unworkable policies, country first, party second. He spoke about Britain leading the way. Why shouldn't it be Britain that leads the way, as he posed the question when it came to clean power? A pledge that we have already heard this week to be 100% clean power by 2030. He said it was a national effort and he didn't see why it shouldn't be the UK that led from the front. He spoke about economic competence. He said that this was a moment when Labour could prove they could be trusted with the economy. That in the light of Friday's statement by the Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng. But there was a moment of candour when he said we may not be able to do all the things, all the good Labour things, as quickly as we might want to. He's now making his way out of the conference hall. No doubt people will be on their feet for several moments. One of the other standing ovations was when he talked about the NHS, his commitment to the NHS, a cornerstone for successive Labour governments and parties in opposition. They've already committed the party to spending the money raised if a Labour government were to come to power, reinstating that 45p top rate of tax to be spent on thousands more nurses. I have Ayesha Hazarika here with me and Katy Balls from The Spectator, Ayesha Hazarika from Times Radio. Ayesha, what did you make of it?
Well, I thought he'll be very pleased with that speech. His team will be as well. I actually thought it was a better speech than last year. I personally felt that he looked a very different type of performer from last year, and a very different type of politician. He looked much more confident. He looked much more comfortable in his own skin. My understanding from his team is that he's worked with a very small number of people. He's actually written a lot of this himself. He's been thinking about this speech and writing it himself for a while now. And I think that really showed. I think his voice and some of his political thinking showed through. I mean, a couple of lines that really kind of stood out to me. You know, this thing about, fail to prepare and prepare to fail. I think that's very much how he's going to try and brand himself. Look, he's not the essay crisis leader. He talked about this, endless cycle of crises that we've had over the couple of years. He's basically pitching himself, I think, more as a sort of Clement Attlee than a Tony Blair, somebody who is calm, sober, coming in at a very, very difficult time, not sunny uplands, a very, very difficult time, calm, sober. So I felt that was very much the mood of it.
What about you, Katie? What did you think? Government in waiting, Prime Minister in waiting, that's what he's got to show people here and beyond the hall out to the country.
Yeah, and I think that moment when he said, this is a Labour moment, and went to the other times in the past where Labour have been in power, you can see him really tapping into that, and sitting at this conference, we've all been saying, is a lot more confident. I think Keir Starmer is a lot more confident. I think he sounds like he actually does believe he could be the next Prime Minister, and I think that's been missing a bit in the past. I think that also that clear blue water, that ideological clear blue water between the Tories, now Liz Truss as Prime Minister, is something that is working for Keir Starmer. Because some of the things he's saying, actually, one of the things Boris Johnson would do is he would occupy that centre ground, and people would say, people would depict Boris Johnson as someone who was, very right-wing and so forth, but often on things such as, energy supply.
Big state.
Big state, exactly, and much more, in terms of spending. It was really tricky for Labour to attack, and I think that part of the confidence in Keir Starmer is because Liz Truss has been so clear, because she seems much more small state, doesn't want a windfall tax and so forth, it means that he can just point out these policy differences, and therefore is able to make a coherent, more convincing case for Labour.
I mean, it's interesting, that point, isn't it, Ayesha? Because in a way, the counter for Keir Starmer with Boris Johnson was he was a more serious, sober personality. I mean, that wasn't difficult, obviously, compared to the former Prime Minister. He made a little dive in that speech about saying perhaps the British people have realised you can actually govern with integrity.
Yeah.
And I presume that's what he's talking about. But ideologically, now there is a much bigger gap. It's not really about the personality of the person who is Prime Minister, now Liz Truss, it's the ideology.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think we saw that very clearly actually from his first encounter with Liz Truss at Prime Minister's Questions. There was a very clear ideological difference between them, and of course now this fiscal event that the Conservatives have put into play have done two things. It's like, as Katie was saying, there are clear dividing lines in British politics, but it has also shifted around. I mean, when I was advising Ed Miliband, remember, any talk of borrowing was seen as really, really bad and taxing. Now the question is, what do you do with that borrowing? How do you spend that borrowing? And I think one of the other things which was interesting about what he was saying, I agree with Katie where he's got the space to be a bit more radical. We had some interesting ideas, this great British energy company, British power for British people. But he also sent very strong messages to middle Britain as well. He says, I want to do home ownership. I'm happy for people to create wealth, control immigration with a points-based system, revitalise public services. Big cheers for supporting NATO, Ukraine, slaying some of those dragons from the era of Jeremy Corbyn. So he's got this interesting position where he is being quite radical on some things. We heard about, rail going back into sort of national sort of ownership, but he is still. I mean, the word aspiration came up a number of times.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's not the same as the 10 policy pledges that he made at the time of his leadership, which was going to throw everything into public ownership. But there is obviously a movement slightly back towards that with, as you say, this new publicly owned energy company. On the aspiration point, he obviously feels that he has to occupy whatever you want to define as the centre ground to have an electoral chance because of the drubbing of the 2019 election and all those seats that Labour lost.
Yes, exactly. And I also thought there was some housekeeping at the start, which Ayesha mentioned, which is, talking about the royal family.
Yeah.
Tick.
Well,
and then you had,
which they started,
support,
of course, with God Save the King.
Exactly. And, going back to that, a stunt which obviously some on the Labour left didn't like the idea of it happening at this conference, but it went off without hitch, and he went back to that. And then I think also, obviously, the support for Ukraine, which feeds into one of Labour's weaknesses on foreign policy during the Jeremy Corbyn period. I think you're trying to, win back parts of the Red Wall. That's always been really key, trying to show that support.
Patriotism.
Yeah, exactly, and and then I think also when you're going through the list of all those things, I think it was just a general sense of trying to say, we are the sensible option in the economy, but also on some of those values and aspiration, trying to be the centre ground and almost saying the Labour Party you've seen a few years ago, we are not that, and anti-Semitism again, bringing that up, the fact that he has tackled that.
I think the value
cheers in that hall, which shows how the party is changing again.
And I think the values thing is really interesting because another line that I thought was interesting, he sort of talked about, his parents lived in a time where if you worked hard, you could get on, and he's very much, I mean, that's very evocative of this idea of a promise of Britain, or the American dream, where, you know, if you work hard, you can get on, the next generation should do better than the last. And I thought that's, you know, much more of an emotional argument that he's sort of bringing in as well. Again, to appeal to well, not just to Middle Britain, but tapping into that frustration that a lot of people have right now.
I mean, as you're saying, the sort of electoral space that might open up, it is becoming clearer, except for the issue of Scotland.
Yes.
And SNP's dominance there. Now, he made a very clear commitment there towards the end of his speech. There will be no deal with the SNP, because it was that dogged Ed Miliband, your former boss, in 2015, because there were those posters, as people will remember, Ed Miliband being in the pocket of Alex Salmond.
Absolutely, and I remember in that short campaign we saw a shift even in the sort of 4-week period. At the beginning of the campaign, we were knocking in doors, you know, in quite sort of target seats, Conservatives hoping to move to Labour. Those posters hit the billboards, and we went back to those places and they were like, we're a bit nervous now. So Labour's going to be very, very nervous about that. That's why we're seeing such clear signals being sent out. But if Labour is going to win more seats in Scotland, they are going to have to persuade soft independence voters, soft SNP voters, to come over to Labour. So they're sending a very strong message to voters in England that they would do no deal with the SNP and the SNP are terrible. But that message might not go so well with some of the voters they need to bring over in Scotland.
Katie?
Yeah, I think that clearly the coalition of chaos, I mean...
That's right.
I think, in a way, I think it'd be quite hard for the Tories to go on coalition of chaos at the next election, given it's not exactly been a calm, smooth period of government. No. So in a way, but there's clearly a vulnerability there, and I think we are seeing Keir Starmer try to say no. I think the problem is, you can say absolutely no deal whatsoever, but we're still going to be saying, well, what happens if, yes, there's polls suggesting Labour would win a very big majority right now, but what happens if they, you know, are just the largest party, and they have to work with another, and you've realised the SNP, so is that a minority government? And then you're still going to get questions about this, I think, and if so, is that any agreement? How does that work?
Well, they don't
in
want
practice?
to talk about that at
exactly.
the moment, of course, but I mean, well, the polls have suggested that that's more likely.
And there is, look, Labour strategists tell me that even if they're in a minority government, they will not do any deals with the SNP, and they don't think they need to. However, there is another argument which is important to take into account, and this is an argument that Anna Sarwar makes, who is the leader of Labour in Scotland. If it looks like Keir Starmer is a serious contender for Downing Street, that might persuade some more soft SNP voters to go, right, my desire to kick out the Tories is stronger than the constitutional question, particularly if they're worried about their mortgages and the economy tanking and things like that. Now, that is a big if, but that is an argument.
I mean, I suppose there's a truth in that. They're not going to vote against, in that sense, some of the key policies, are they? Labour will be able to rely, in that instance, of being the largest party but a minority government.
Yeah, and I think to Ayesha's point, if you can look as though you were on the cusp of a majority, ultimately, something that's helped the SNP with some of its support for independence are those who don't want the Tories to be in power and think it is indefinite Tory rule, and that pushes them to vote. Whereas if it looks as though that period is coming to an end, then I think, you know, some of the softer independence voters might get behind Labour, so it can work that way too. But it's always tricky when it's, you know, who's pulling whose strings if you don't get the numbers. Right now, if Keir Starmer can keep the current poll leads we're seeing over Liz Truss, he doesn't have to get too much into these conversations. But
no, I mean, that's a big if, obviously, and we're still talking about potentially 2 years away. An awful lot can happen. One of the things that you mentioned while the speech was going on about a sort of clear thought, one clear thought narrative, slogan, not the one that they're using for the conference itself. What did it emerge?
I felt this was, there were sort of wee green shoots of this. There were a couple. So I think what we saw was a lot of, you know, very good, strong themes, some really interesting policy ideas. I feel like many of your viewers will probably think it's still, if you were to say to people, like, what was the one big takeaway message, other than we are very much praying for government, I still think some work needs to be done to distill all those policies and all those thoughts and all those themes down to a bit of a, I know people hate slogans, but in politics, slogans are important because they tell a story about all the big messages and all the policy. I mean, a couple of lines stood out to me, you know, building a new Britain together, you know, a fresh start for Britain. We heard a few lines like that. I suspect we'll probably see more of that as we, because remember, look, we're 2 years out from a general election.
And there's time to finesse it in that
absolutely.
sense. For you?
I struggle to think of a single line from it in the sense, I think a Labour moment captures the sense.
Definitely.
To me, that captures the sense that perhaps what the Tories are putting forward is going out of fashion, and actually what Labour's putting forward will be more. And I think that's something they're trying to project, and that to me summed up that vision which is being pushed. I think what Keir Starmer, I think, has successfully done is move the Labour Party from a point where some voters just didn't think it represented, or they found it a bit scary, to one where actually I think that is gone. I think people are not scared of the idea of a Labour government like some were a few years ago. In terms of this compelling vision, which means if the Tories get their act together and are doing well, that beats that, I think we still need to know exactly Labour's, you know, what is the clear pitch. But I think in terms of comparing yourself to where the Tories are right now and looking as though you are something, you know, people can take a chance on, I think he has succeeded in actually getting rid of quite a few of the vulnerabilities.
I mean, and also it's not just about him. Of course, he's the leader of the party, but you see the pictures across the front bench, the shadow cabinet. Wes Streeting, Ed Miliband, Rachel Reeves, Bridget Phillipson. Do you feel that the team is there now in terms of, you know, pooling of talent?
Undoubtedly. I mean, that has been one of the biggest sort of, I think, transformatory things that Keir Starmer did, which is he did shake up the shadow cabinet. He did bring in a huge amount of talent, particularly bringing people like Rachel into being the shadow chancellor. I mean, and people like Yvette Cooper. What's so interesting, picking up on what Katie just said about people not being frightened of the Labour Party, it's partly because of the shadow cabinet as well. So take business. Yesterday there was a business forum here at the Labour Party. Now, it was sold out. They've told me they could have sold it out 5 times over. A lot of business leaders and from the financial services sector as well, they really respect and rate Rachel Reeves. So you've got a feeling like the suits are back at the Labour Party.
Well,
people don't feel frightened of a Labour government.
Yeah, have you seen that in terms of the suits, as Ayesha calls them?
I think you completely have, and also you just walk around the exhibition hall, it is full. The fact that, you know, people are, it has more stalls, more businesses here, and actually I was speaking to some people and saying, you know, in teams, they're saying, oh, actually we're sending just as many people to Labour as Tory, perhaps even more in some cases.
The indicators.
And I think that does suggest that, you know, people are taking it seriously and actually thinking, A, this might happen, but 2, they think that there is something they can, you know, liaise on and actually potentially work with.
Let's introduce the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner. Hello to you. We haven't spoken for a couple of months, but I remember we did sit at the last Labour conference together. Well done for battling your way out of the conference hall. What did you think?
I thought it was great. You know, I was really, you know, Keir gave parts of Keir that, you know, many people say, what's Keir like? And I always say, if you only see the Keir that I see, that was the Keir that I see. He talked about his motivation into politics. He talked about, you know, making sure that there's standards, that people have respect, but that we have respect for the British people and British industry, and that we have the tools in which we can grow Britain again and be proud of ourselves. It was incredibly inspirational.
Well, you said to me, to us on newscast, that actually if only people did see the Keir Starmer that I see, you'd love him as much as I do. Did he give it the welly, the passion?
Oh yeah, I mean, I felt that was the Keir that I see day in, day out, that he's talking about, you know, he was a working class kid. He talked about how proud his parents were of owning the Pebble Dash terraced house. I thought it was an incredibly inspiring speech. And he talked about, let's get off our knees. We don't want to be crunched down anymore. We want to be positive. But it's not just about words and slogans. It's about how we're going to do the hard graft now and reap the rewards of that together inclusively. And I thought it was an incredibly powerful speech that will give every part of the UK some hope that actually we can work together to make this happen.
One of the big announcements, and certainly actually a theme this week, is the green commitment by the Labour Party. And he said, you know, very passionately that Britain should be leading the way when it comes to a greener future. He talked about this great British energy company, new publicly owned company. How would it work in terms of actually delivering those cheaper bills that people want?
Well, we know we've got to get to renewables. We know we've got to be self-reliant on our energy needs, and it's about turbocharging that. And it's about the public having the investment in it, but also having the stake in it. So it will bring down energy prices, but it'll also...
But how will it do that? How can you say to people who are facing, I know we've had this sort of cap, that the average household bill will be around £2,500. Can you commit that this new company, it sounds good, that it will actually work and reduce...
It will, because it's renewables, it's our water, it's our hydrogen, it's our, wind, onshore wind. It's bringing all of that together, harnessing that technology, that power, investing in it, so we've got new jobs, 1 million new jobs as part of that deal, but also that we're self-reliant then, and we're not in the global market on gas and oil prices, and that will be, incredibly well received by business, I think, who are struggling, and also by households that are really needing that desperate, short-term help, but also that long-term plan of how we get to a better place than where we are now.
Right, so this company is going to be taken out of the global energy market in terms of prices. It'll be separate to that.
We're going to vamp up. It's going to be our company that builds that technology that is able to import to all of our households and businesses renewable energy. So it will be taking the wind, the energy, the sea, the carbon. We'll be making sure that all of those natural ways of creating energy is pumped right back into households and into our businesses here. And then the technology that we develop will also mean that we'll be internationally able to make sure we're world leaders on this.
You know that when Keir Starmer stood for the leadership, he had his 10 policy pledges or commitments, and it included putting utilities, all of them, into public ownership. He's rowed back from that. Will you understand
that? It's rowing back. We're going forwards. That's not the, that's the past. This is the future.
Well, and only on some of it. There has been this commitment to nationalising rail. We have got this publicly owned company not nationalising, obviously, energy right across the board. What about the people here who would have liked to have seen that? You will be disappointing those who said and believed Keir Starmer when he said that 2017 manifesto of Jeremy Corbyn was a foundational document.
Sure. What Keir's doing is we're not looking at the past, we're looking at the future and what our future needs are. So we know that we need to look at renewables, we know we need to invest in British industry, we know we need to partnership together, and we know we need good public services. And the public, if they put money into investment, they should reap the rewards of that as well and have a stake in that. And that was the journey that Rachel Reeves sent us on yesterday, and it's also the journey that Keir is setting out today with the GB Energy. He said actually it will help power the next generation into the green energy that we need to see into the future.
I mean, economic competence is what Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have talked about. You've already committed to £28 billion a year to tackle climate change and for green policies. I spoke to your colleague a little earlier today, Jonathan Reynolds, who said that everything will be under review. And I wondered if that is a sense of not being able to commit going forward to that £28 billion a year on green...
No, that's an investment, and here's the difference, because at the moment what the Conservatives are doing is they're increasing borrowing and they're increasing debt.
You'd have to increase borrowing too.
But they're doing it to give 1% of the country a tax cut. We're talking about investment where the public will have a stake in the future of business, in the future of technology, so that we can grow our economy in the long term, so that everyone is able to, do well out of that, and also making sure that workers are not undercut or that they have precarious, insecure work.
Well,
so it's a partnership. It's good for workers and it's good for business.
Well, actually, since you bring up workers and being on the side of workers, you will know that Conference has passed a motion here to say that people like you, members of the Shadow Cabinet, should be joining workers on the picket line. That's something they would like to see. And you're not going to do it, are you?
We're going to get into government and abolish the picket line because there won't be any need for it. That's the point we were making.
Good answer,
no worker wants to be on the picket
line. But until that point, that's ruled out, isn't it? You're not going to join. You're on the side of workers, but not so much that you want to stand with on strikes for fair pay.
I've met with the General Secretaries and have been working with them to push the government and the employees to find a solution. In Wales, we don't have that industrial action. We have a Welsh Labour government.
Yes, well, you have a Welsh Labour government, and Mark Drake, for the First Minister, has been very, very clear. He wants to see inflation or above inflation rises, pay rises, for those workers that are going on strike. But I haven't heard that from Mark or Keir Starmer. Starmer.
Matt Drakeford is a leader in Wales, and there's no industrial action in Wales because they've got the bodies. But
would you like to see that here? Would you like to see?
But we've set out in the future of work where the employers work with the trade unions to avoid industrial action. That's what we want to see here. We don't want to see picket lines. I don't want a picture on a picket line.
Course.
I want to see workers at work feeling respected and given a decent, fair day's pay for a decent, fair day's work.
But can you then truly say you are on the side of working people who are struggling, who have been forced out on strike as they see it, and who look to the Labour Party and they're not there with them, not physically?
Oh, they see that. They know we're with them. They saw it through the Green Paper for the future of work. They've seen it with procurement, making sure that insourcing, making sure that we're making sure every pound that is spent, we invest in our public services as well. They see that in Keir's commitment today around setting up the GB Energy, talking about, 1 million new jobs. They see that we're on the side of people, working people of this country. That's how we change their lives, not stood on a picket line. That's how we're going to change people's lives for the better.
What would be the one big idea from a future Labour government that would transform people's lives, people here at this conference?
Growing our economy in a sustainable way so that there's more of the pie to invest in public services.
But that's what we're hearing from Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng.
But they've tanked the economy over the last couple of days.
But
we're
how do we know the market?
danger.
So what would
because
be different?
The market
what
doesn't
would
have
be
the confidence because they're saying tax cuts at the same time as increased borrowing. Because we're not proposing that. We're proposing real investment that's going to grow the economy in a sustainable way, and a plan to do it that will give confidence to business, confidence to the markets, and also give us our world-leading part in the stage internationally, so people see us as the competitors globally instead of the pariahs globally that we've been seeing under the Conservatives.
Except you are agreeing to take national insurance contributions. You agree with the government on that. You're going to reverse that. You agree
the government,
of cutting...
The government wanted to increase the taxes, and we opposed it at the time because we felt it was the wrong tax.
Now you're in agreement with the government in exactly the same way.
No, we've said the 45p rate shouldn't have happened, and we'd put that back up. We said we should tackle non-dom status. We've said that oil and gas companies that have made huge profits should pay their share rather than saddle the next generation with debt. There's lots of different changes that we've said are our priorities about how we grow the economy and how we pay for things. And Rachel Reeves was very clear in her statement yesterday that we will make sure that every single one of our plans are costed.
Right, you're going to the next election saying you're going to put up taxes. You're going to put that 45 pence rate of tax, you're going to reinstate
for the 1%. For the 1% that we think those with the broadest shoulders should pay a little bit more. And the 1% that I've been speaking to, they were squirming in their seats because they know this isn't the right move at this time when people can't afford to pay their bills, when ordinary workers in this country are told they've got to show wage restraint. We let bankers lift the cap on bankers' bonuses and give the 1% a massive big tax cut. That's not a priority at the moment. The priority is investing in the public services, growing our economy and investing in our business.
No cuts in public services then?
We want to invest in public services, and if you heard what Keir said then, and he was very clear, it's also about reform.
But how would you pay for it? How would you pay for it if you've agreed to reverse that 1.25 percentage point rise in national insurance that was going to go to the National Health Service and the Health and Social Care Levy? Where will you find the money?
So, for example, you saw in my speech around procurement, billions of pounds wasted. So it's about making sure the money that goes in the right place. We saw it if it's social care, where we've got the acute crisis in the NHS now because we have the vacancies and we don't have the skills that we need at the place where we need it. That costs money. Not only is that bad for people who are not getting the support they need it when they need it, but it costs us more money to do it that way. So we can find savings by doing things effectively and properly.
Well, all governments or future governments do say those things, but I'll take you at your word, Angela. Can I point you to a different story? We were talking about it before Keir Starmer's speech. Let's just show everybody or remind them of this tweet from Jake Berry, chairman of the Conservative Party, calling on Keir Starmer to act over Rupert Hook, Labour MP's disgusting comments, he calls them, at this party conference about the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng. Superficially, he is a black man. Because he's Conservative is a vile thing to say. That's what she said in a fringe here at the Labour Party conference, that when he's on the Today programme, Kwasi Kwarteng, she said he doesn't even sound like a black man. Do you condemn those comments?
Yeah, I mean, she should apologise for those comments. I haven't seen it. I've seen what you've just said now, but for me, those comments are completely unacceptable.
I mean, what about losing the whip? That's what Jake Berry wants to see. He'd like Keir Starmer to take firm action against what he thinks are vile comments.
Well, I think Rupert needs to reflect on what she said, and she needs to take immediate action. As I've said previously with people, when they've made mistakes and they've said something that is completely inappropriate, recognise that and make sure that you publicly acknowledge that and apologise. It's not the right thing to say.
And if she doesn't take action to apologise herself, then what?
Well, then that's a whipping matter and what they do regarding the whip, but I'm pretty certain that the whip will see that and will say that that's not acceptable. I'm sure that Rupert will recognise that that's not acceptable. I've known Rupert a very long time, and I don't think that those comments are appropriate.
Angela Rayner, thank you very much. Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, joining us here outside the conference hall where Keir Starmer has given his speech to delegates. We've got quite a few of them, I'm pleased to say, around here listening to the interview with Angela Rayner. But let's find out a little bit more about what people thought about Keir Starmer's speech with Ione Wells, our political correspondent. Ione.
Joe, well, the mood outside the conference hall here is pretty buoyant. I'm joined by a couple of delegates who were watching that speech by Keir Starmer. What did you make of it? What were the standout messages?
Absolutely fantastic. He brought the A game today, standing up for the NHS, true Labour values, nationalising the energy, utility companies and helping working class families. Brilliant, first class, can't wait for the general election.
And you're delegates from Allen and Deeside. There's a wafer-thin Labour majority there, nearly lost to the Conservatives last election. Does Keir Starmer have what it takes, do you think, to win back support from people who flipped to the Tories at the last election?
I think so, definitely. There was a very, very clear message today. We know what we're going out with on the doorstep, and we can assure people that, you know, we are a government in waiting, and Keir is going to be our next Prime Minister.
And how confident are you that some of the policies he talked about there are going to land, are going to cut through with the public outside of just Labour conference and the members here?
Well, I think with young people, especially like my age, it's very promising to hear about their housing deals that they've got going on, and being able to think that we can get our own house, and like it's not an aspiration anymore, it could be real, which is amazing.
What about you? What were the standout policies for all of you?
I think they're nationalising Great British Energy. That was just blew us all away. It was fantastic, absolutely brilliant. And like my daughter said, you know, she had no hope of getting on the housing ladder a couple of years ago, but now there's a real chance that her and her partner can actually afford their own home, you know.
And in a couple of words, very briefly, what was your feel of the mood in there compared to last year's conference?
Optimistic. We're full of confidence going into the next general election, and Keir will be the next Prime Minister.
Yeah, there's definitely a buzz in that arena today. Definitely.
So a pretty positive mood there from some of the delegates here from Allen and Deeside. I think that's been reflected by a lot of the people we've been speaking to outside the conference here, and no doubt some of the ones back with you in this set, Joe.
Thanks very much, Ione Wells there, mingling with delegates. Yes, they sound buoyant, they're pleased. I suppose that's not really a surprise after the days we've had here and that conference speech. Your thoughts?
I feel like since Keir Starmer became leader, there's been a lot of doom and gloom. He didn't even get to make a speech for a very long time. To me, this almost feels like his honeymoon sort of conference. It's like the first time he's really had the chance to enjoy conference, not have lots of internal division. I feel like this is the first time he's been able to really pivot out to the public and not talk about internal party matters. And as your Vox Pops just said, there is something in the air. There is an optimism that has not been felt since about 2006, 2007. It feels like the possibility is there that Labour might win. Now, there's no room for complacency, but this is a big feeling because this is a feeling the Labour Party has not had for a very long time.
Yeah, I agree there's that level of optimism. You're hearing it from the delegates, and obviously you would expect them to be receptive, of course. I think that there's two sides to this, in the sense what's happening with the Tory party and the economy right now helps Keir Starmer to a degree, but we also heard in that speech he had to acknowledge that a Labour government, if we do get one, will not be able to do all the things they want to do. They'll be inheriting a very difficult situation. And listening to Angela Rayner speak to you, some tricky questions on actually how they would have, you know, market confidence. They are planning to cut some taxes, no matter what say, and therefore I think a tricky inheritance if they do get there.
Tricky questions, that's what we like on this programme. From all of us here, bye-bye. I'll be back tomorrow.